why the fifth dimension might already be around us. It is one of the strangest features of our era that we feel more connected than any generation in history. Yet many of us have never felt more alone. We have instruments that can listen to atoms whisper and telescopes that catch the light of newborn galaxies, yet we can barely make it through dinner without checking a glowing rectangle for validation. We applaud breakthroughs that extend lifespans, but we scroll past the quiet suffering next door. We have never had more data and never been hungrier for wisdom. If that contradiction makes you uneasy, good. Unease is a sign that your inner instruments are calibrated. Consider it a pre-flight check. This is where I begin not with answers, but with a paradox in hand and a question on deck. If our tools are evolving exponentially while our patience seems to be shrinking linearly, what happens to the arc of our civilization? What happens to a species that can map the genome but struggles to map how best to live together? What happens when we can reach the moon again and Mars soon after, but cannot agree on what we owe one another here on Earth? I don't ask these questions to scold. I ask them to aim our curiosity. A telescope without a target is just expensive glass. For most of human history, our map of reality was drawn with feeling, myth, and the most persuasive storyteller in the village. Then came instruments. First the humble lens, then the spectroscope, then the radio dish, then orbiting observatories that treated the entire planet as a noise source to be flown above. Each device was a prosthetic for the senses, a way to enlarge the aperture of human perception. And the more we saw, the more we realized we were blind. The universe, it turns out, is not obligated to be intuitive. It's only obligated to be consistent. We discovered that the cosmos has a history first sketched by redshifts, then dramatized by the microwave afterglow of a hot, dense beginning. That faint, uniform hum, the cosmic microwave background, was a baby picture not of stars or galaxies, but of the very blueprint from which they would arise. By examining tiny fluctuations, we learned that quantum jitters in the infant universe would one day grow into continents of galaxies. We learned that space can expand, that time can stretch, and that gravity can curve the stage on which everything performs. We also learned a more humbling statistic. Roughly 95% of the universe's contents are not the atoms and light we understand, but dark matter and dark energy names that function less like explanations and more like sticky notes that say, to be figured out. Some people hear this and despair. I hear it and feel relief. The unknown is not an indictment of our ignorance, it is an invitation to our competence. The unknown is job security for curiosity. And this is where an idea creeps in, not mystical, not numerological, just a working metaphor that helps me tie the technical to the tangible. We talk of 4 dimensions every day, 3 of space, 1 of time. But there is a 5th that does not bend rulers or slow clocks. It curves behavior. I don't mean a secret coordinate hidden between quarks. I mean the field that emerges when knowledge meets conscience, when fact meets empathy, when awareness graduates into responsibility. Call it the social field, the ethical metric, the human curvature of space-time. Call it, if you like, the 5th dimension already around us. Think about how gravity works. Mass and energy tell space-time how to curve, and that curvature tells matter how to move. In our lived world, verified facts and shared values tell culture how to curve, and that curvature tells people how to move. When truth thins out, the path of least resistance becomes chaos. When truth is dense and empathy is strong, trajectories converge toward cooperation. If that sounds aspirational, note that it's also measurable. Public health improves when trust is high. Innovation accelerates where education is robust. Violence drops when opportunity rises. These are not vibes. These are statistics. So let's look outward for a moment to learn how to live inward. The night sky is a ledger of finished experiments. Stars are thermonuclear reactors wrapped in their own gravity. They teach us that stability is not stasis. It's a dynamic balance between collapse and explosion. Our societies demand the same: liberty and order and tension, ambition and restraint in orbit, tradition and reform in perpetual transfer of momentum. The best star is not the one that burns hottest. It is the one that burns long enough to seed the future with heavy elements. The best civilization is not the loudest. It is the one that lasts long enough to leave descendants options rather than obligations. History gives us the control group. Consider the printing press. Before movable type, knowledge traveled at the speed of a horse. After Gutenberg, ideas moved at the speed of curiosity. Reformations followed, and revolutions, and a messy, glorious, painful expansion of who counted as fully human. Then came the steam engine, which turned fossil sunlight into mechanical motion, and our species experienced its first true energy windfall. Cities grew, lifespans stretched, so did smokestacks and inequities. The telegraph, the radio, the microchip, each time we amplified our reach, we also magnified our capacity to harm. Technology is a lever. Levers lengthen your arm. They don't choose where you point. Spaceflight added a new kind of leverage. Perspective. When Yuri Gagarin first orbited the Earth, he didn't see borders or ideologies. He saw weather. When the Apollo astronauts took the famous blue marble portraits, the planet looked both invincible and impossibly delicate. Like a jewel you'd be a fool to wear to a demolition derby. And when Voyager 1 turned to take the pale blue dot, our entire history fit in a single mote of light suspended in the vastness. It was not an insult to our importance, it was a calibration of it. Meaning is not measured in acreage, but in stewardship. Now consider this. We are living at a hinge in time when our species wields planetary scale tools with Stone Age wiring in our brains. We're neurologically tuned for short-term threats, snakes, and rival clans, not carbon budgets and statistical warnings. That mismatch is survivable if we build institutions that extend our senses and lengthen our time horizons. Science does that. So do libraries, schools, and yes, laws. They are the memory and the promises of the tribe, written down so we don't forget them when we get scared. Fear is a good early warning system and a terrible pilot. It kept our ancestors alive when something rustled in the grass. But fear plus amplification yields panic, and panic at scale becomes policy. The antidote is not to shame fear. It's to outcompete it with comprehension. You do that the way spacecraft do everything difficult, with checklists, redundancy, simulation, and cool heads. The moon was not won by swagger. It was won by test stands and telemetry, and the humility to let the numbers overrule the hunches. Humility, by the way, is not humiliation. It's simply being more committed to what is true than to what makes you look good. In labs, we call that error bars. In life, we call it listening. You know what happens to a team that refuses to listen to telemetry? They become a case study in failure analysis. The universe is littered with the remains of organisms that couldn't update their models fast enough. If I sound like I'm giving you a flight briefing, good. Earth is a spacecraft with 3 undeniable constraints: limited supplies, fragile life support systems, and no rescue ship in range. The carbon we pour into the air does not check our politics before trapping heat. Ocean chemistry does not care what we intended when it receives our fertilizers. Viruses are indifferent to our conspiracy theories. Physics is not partisan. Biology is not sentimental. Reality is not optional. Yet reality is generous when you cooperate with it. We've already run this experiment at smaller scales. When a city invests in clean air, hospital admissions drop, and school performance rises. When a country invests in childhood nutrition, GDP grows decades later. When a planet invests in vaccines, average life expectancy blossoms from 40 to more than 70 years in a single century. That is not magic. That is applied empathy riding on the back of reliable data. That is the 5th dimension at work. The field in which knowledge curves toward care. But a field doesn't generate itself. It is powered by choices, millions of them, small and compounding, like interest that never sleeps. One person decides to learn the names of the constellations so that children can inherit both a sky and a story. Another decides to take a bus once a week instead of a car, shaving a thin slice off a thick problem. A teacher decides to grade for mastery instead of curve-bound ranking. And a future engineer who might have quit stays in the game. a city council votes to measure what it manages air, water, transit, so that budgets track outcomes instead of slogans. None of those acts are cinematic. All of them are cosmic. Why cosmic? Because the universe is a chain of cause and effect longer than our pride. A massive star does not know your name, yet it patiently forges the calcium in your bones. A marine plankton bloom in the Southern Ocean does not vote, yet it gifts you the oxygen for every second breath. A glacier upstream does not send a memo before it releases water that grows your food. If you are not awed by those dependencies, check your instruments. They might be stuck on selfie mode. This is the part where people ask me if I believe humanity is special. I do, but not because I think the cosmos kept a reserved seat for us. We are special because we can tell the difference between what feels right and what is right, and we can change course when they disagree. We are special because we can move our minds across centuries and empathize with descendants we will never meet. We are special because we can take responsibility not only for our intentions, but for our impact. The asteroid that ended the dinosaurs didn't hold a press conference. We get to the fifth dimension I'm pointing to is mundane in practice and magnificent in result. It's the measure of a culture's capacity to transform accurate description into compassionate prescription. It begins always with the discipline of reality. If the data say your river is warming, the fifth dimension nudges you to cool it, not argue with the thermometer. If the model says your city will flood, it nudges you to raise the seawall, move the substation, rethink the zoning. If the evidence says your children learn best when they are fed and safe and seen, it nudges you to spend where it counts, not where the ribbon cutting is pretty. This dimension is also funny in the way science often is. For example, we call it a global supply chain, as if it were a tidy necklace of pearls. In practice, it behaves more like a Rube Goldberg machine designed by weather, geopolitics, and luck. One ship stuck in a canal and your bicycle costs more. One drought and your breakfast changes. One novel microbe and history pivots. Systems thinking is not a graduate seminar elective. It's basic survival in a planet-sized lab. Let's talk about power. The Kardashev scale imagines civilizations by the energy they can command. Planetary, stellar, galactic. We are not yet a Type 1 civilization. We haven't even mastered our planet. But there's another scale we should care about more, the responsibility scale. A species that can alter its atmosphere and edit its genome has graduated into a new moral grade. You don't hand a child a welding torch and say, go express yourself. You teach technique, safety, and purpose. Our tools got ahead of our temperament. The remedy is not to fear the tools, it's to grow the temperament. We can, we have. Consider how quickly we learned to read the genome. In the span of a few decades, we went from the first human genome, costing the price of a moonshot, to handheld sequencers that fit in a backpack. With that power came ethical debates that no previous generation could have had. Should we edit embryos to remove certain diseases? What counts as therapy versus enhancement? Who decides and who benefits? These are not physics questions. They're fifth dimension questions, how knowledge bends the trajectory of values. Or take artificial intelligence, a phrase that means many things to many people. To some, it is a mirror that reflects our biases with inhuman efficiency. To others, it's a lever that could pry open new cures, designs, and discoveries. Both are true because our models learn from our mess. If we don't debug ourselves, we will simply automate our errors at scale. But if we pair statistical prowess with humane guardrails, transparency, accountability, equity, we get systems that extend our competence without compressing our dignity. That pairing is not optional. It's the whole ballgame. If this sounds like a sermon for engineers, let me widen the aperture. The fifth dimension is not the sole property of labs and launch pads. It lives in music classrooms where students learn that discipline makes room for freedom. It lives in courtrooms where justice tries to be blind but not deaf. It lives in farms where soil is treated as a living library rather than a disposable sponge. It lives in journalism that prizes correction over victory laps. It lives anywhere people decide that truth is a team sport. What about wonder? Does it survive realism? Absolutely. Wonder is not the enemy of rigor. It is its renewable fuel. When I tell you that every iron atom in your blood was baked in a star that died before the sun was born, I'm not asking you to swoon. I'm asking you to recognize a lineage that makes cheap cynicism look, well, cheap. When I tell you that the light from distant galaxies left when multicellular life was just workshopping the jellyfish, I'm not selling mysticism. I'm offering perspective, the one resource that compounds faster than interest and pays dividends in patience. Patience may be the rarest commodity in the attention economy, but it's what science asks of us and what the future requires. Trees invest for centuries without a quarterly report. Glaciers move with a confidence that only deep time can justify. We do not have the luxury of glacier speed, but we can borrow glacier attitude, steady, cumulative, unshowy progress. If you need drama, watch a supernova. If you need survival, become a slow, competent river. None of this absolves us from urgency. The climate clock is not a mood ring. The concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is a measurement anyone with the right instruments can make. The warming that follows is a calculation any sophomore physics student can perform. The feedback's melting ice, thawing permafrost, shifting currents are complex, but complexity is not an excuse for delay. Engineers do not throw up their hands when the math gets spicy. They add sensors, they test, they iterate, they fix what they can and design around what they can't. That is the ethic that built the rockets, the bridges, the vaccines, the microchips, and the social movements that bent history toward inclusion. Inclusion, by the way, is not charity. It's calibration. You don't get the best solution set if you discard half the variables. The universe did not hide intelligence in a single zip code. Talent is a distribution. Opportunity is the filter. Widen the filter and you accelerate discovery. That's not a press release, that's a production function. I promised you no mysticism, so let me be concrete about the fifth dimension in practice. It looks like cities that build housing near jobs rather than dreams near highways. It looks like power grids that behave less like dominoes and more like nets, distributed, resilient, upgradable. It looks like public transit that moves people instead of performing a ritual. It looks like hospitals that prefer prevention over heroics, and schools that equip students to interrogate claims rather than memorize answers. It looks like companies that treat externalities like invoices, not rulers. It looks like leaders who find it more satisfying to be corrected than to be obeyed. And yes, it looks like space programs that translate awe into utility. Apollo did not just plant flags. It planted an R&D culture that miniaturized electronics, refined materials, advanced imaging, and inspired generations to treat math like a superpower instead of a punishment. The International Space Station did not end war, but it normalized cooperation where gravity is zero and excuses have a hard time gaining traction. The James Webb Space Telescope does not feed the hungry, but it expands the menu of what's possible, and possibility is a nutrient. Let's end where we began, with paradox. We are small, and we are significant. We are temporary, and we are timely. We are a species that can destroy itself by accident or save itself on purpose. The fifth dimension is the difference between those outcomes. It is the field we create when we let reality educate our values and let our values discipline our power. It is not mystical. It is measurable in hospital wards, river deltas, classrooms, court dockets, and yes, launch manifests. And here is the finale I owe you. The space race was born of rivalry and fear. It could have ended with a crater. Instead, it gave us a mirror. In that mirror was a blue world with no lifeboats, wrapped in an atmosphere thinner than a painter's varnish, inhabited by a species clever enough to reach the moon and confused enough to bring its petty arguments along for the ride. That mirror is still available. You don't need a rocket to look into it. You need a window, a night sky, and a willingness to feel small the way a pilot feels small. Not humbled into paralysis, but oriented for action. So take the orientation. Treat facts as friends and the future as a stakeholder. Use your vote like a lever and your dollar like a message. Mentor someone. Learn a skill that mends. Waste less. Share more. Aim long. Build tools that make it easier for others to do the right thing than the wrong thing. That is not a slogan. That is the only known path by which civilizations earn their commas in the long sentence of time. If we do this, the fifth dimension will not be a metaphor we recycle in lectures. It will be the ambient field of a planet that learned to steer itself. We will still argue we're primates with Wi-Fi, but our arguments will orbit truth rather than circling the drain. We will still mourn losses. Entropy never sleeps, but our grief will be ennobled by the knowledge that we did not look away. We will still chase horizons. Ambition is not a sin, but we will remember to pack the virtues that kept astronauts alive. Checklists, teamwork, respect for reality. Infinity may be out of reach. That's fine. Meaning isn't. It's right here in the choices we'll make when this video ends, when the lights come up, when tomorrow arrives, disguised as today. The cosmos has already invested in us stardust for bones, time for learning, freedom to choose. Let's pay it back with competence. Why the fifth dimension might already be around us is no longer a mystery. It's us. Information awareness turning into responsibility, turning into action. That is how a small species on a pale dot graduates to adulthood. That is how we connect the space race to this century's race. The race to become worth our technologies, worthy of our science, and worthy finally of one another. Check your instruments, mind your margins, choose your vector, and then go do the next right thing at escape velocity. It's tempting, when faced with so much complexity, to imagine that progress requires grand gestures, monumental projects, Apollo-sized commitments, and indeed sometimes it does. But if you zoom in on any monumental achievement, you find that it is composed of thousands, sometimes millions of smaller acts, each one carrying its share of weight. The moon landing wasn't one leap. It was a million steps, each checked, tested, repeated. Engineers signing off on designs, technicians tightening bolts to precise torque, astronauts rehearsing procedures until muscle memory carried them through crisis. What looked like magic on television was, up close, the discipline of the mundane. And this is the part we forget. Civilizations are built the same way. Every law passed, every classroom lesson, every act of decency in traffic is a torque applied to the bolts of our shared spacecraft. Ignore enough of them, and the system vibrates itself apart. Attend to them, and the structure holds even under stress. The fifth dimension, our ability to link knowledge with conscience, lies less in grand speeches than in the ordinary precision of daily choices. The universe itself teaches us this. Galaxies are not built from spectacular explosions alone. They are sculpted by gravity, quiet and persistent, acting over billions of years. Stars are not sustained by drama, but by balanced forces of collapse and fusion in exquisite, continuous negotiation. Meaning does not reside in the rare fireworks, but in the ongoing equilibrium. That's what sustains, that's what lasts. Yet, because we are human, we crave spectacle. We are drawn to the extraordinary supernovae, rocket launches, revolutions, but survival is written in the ordinary. And that is why the fifth dimension requires not just awareness in times of crisis, but responsibility in times of calm. It asks us to keep tending the balance when no spotlight shines. History again provides the mirror. The fall of Rome wasn't one event. It was a sequence of neglected adjustments, a long drift-off course. The collapse of civilizations from the Mayans to the ancestral Puebloans often stemmed not from one cataclysm, but from repeated failure to adapt, to listen to the data their environments were giving them: soil thinning, rains shifting, forests vanishing. Collapse, in other words, was a slow-motion loss of the fifth dimension. And so the question we must ask is, can we cultivate the discipline of stewardship before the drift becomes irreversible? Can we learn to treasure the ordinary acts of maintenance, the unglamorous choices that keep the spacecraft Earth habitable? Here is where the cosmic metaphor becomes personal. You don't need to be an astrophysicist to practice the fifth dimension. You need only to recognize that every action curves the trajectory of something larger than yourself. A parent curving the future by showing patience instead of anger. A scientist curving the future by publishing data openly instead of hoarding it. A citizen curving the future by voting for policies that benefit children not yet born. Each act is small, but gravity itself is small, yet it shapes galaxies. And if enough of us commit to that slow, steady pull, the orbit of our civilization will hold. The fifth dimension is not something exotic, locked away in physics we have yet to master. It is already woven into the way societies survive. Consider democracy. At its best, it is a system that recognizes the finitude of individual perspective, then layers those perspectives together to approximate something closer to truth. No single vote bends the arc of history, but taken together, millions of votes curve civilizations. Democracy, when it works, is a fifth-dimensional tool. Knowledge bending into responsibility, responsibility into action. But here's the catch. The fifth dimension weakens when cynicism grows stronger than trust, when we dismiss facts as mere opinions, when truth becomes a matter of convenience instead of consequence. The curve straightens into chaos, and chaos, left uncorrected, is the trajectory of collapse. We see this today in the erosion of trust in science. The data are clear. Vaccines work, climate change is real, clean air saves lives. But when conspiracy or ideology bends harder than reality, the fifth dimension flickers. That flicker isn't mystical, it's measurable. It shows up in infection rates, in rising seas, in forest fires. When knowledge is abandoned, nature still runs the experiment. Only the results are harsher. Contrast that with the moments we got it right. Polio eradicated in much of the world, not by wishing, but by mass vaccination. Acid rain reduced because we listened to chemistry and retooled our industries. The ozone hole shrinking because nations came together and phased out harmful chemicals. In each case, the fifth dimension brightened. Fact-informed conscience. Conscience-guided policy. Policy-altered outcomes. That's not magic. That's competence applied to compassion. And competence, my friends, is underrated. We live in an age that celebrates visionaries, disruptors, geniuses. But civilizations don't survive on genius alone. They survive on competence, the quiet, persistent reliability of millions doing their jobs well. No one writes poems about the engineers who designed gaskets that didn't leak oxygen from spacecraft. But without them, astronauts die. No child memorizes the names of every nurse in an epidemic. But without them, epidemics spread unchecked. The fifth dimension thrives not only in moments of brilliance, but in the constancy of competence. Now, some may wonder, why bother? If the universe itself is destined for entropy, if stars burn out and galaxies drift away, isn't all of this ultimately futile? Why build? Why strive? Why care when infinity itself might collapse into silence? Here's the answer. Meaning has never required eternity. If anything, eternity erases meaning. In a universe where nothing ends, nothing matters. But in a universe of finitude, every choice counts. A life matters because it is brief. A civilization matters because it can collapse. A planet matters because it is fragile. That fragility is not a flaw. It is the source of all value. Think of the rarest elements in the universe. Gold, platinum, uranium. They're born in the violent collisions of neutron stars, scattered across galaxies in brief, extraordinary moments. Their rarity is what gives them worth. So too with us. We are rare. Our time is rare. The fifth dimension is rare. And rarity is meaning. So no, our efforts are not futile. They are finite. And that finitude is what makes them urgent. And perhaps this is the greatest paradox of all. The cosmos humbles us with its vastness, yet empowers us with its rarity. We are not the center of the universe, but we are a center of responsibility. We are stardust, capable of self-awareness. We are atoms rearranged into consciousness, able to imagine futures that do not yet exist. And that imagination, tempered by responsibility, is the raw material of the fifth dimension. So the question is not, will infinity end? The question is, what will we do in the meantime? Because while the stars take billions of years to forge meaning, we can create it in a single generation. Let me take you back in time. Not centuries, but billions of years. Before humanity, before Earth, before even the stars. The universe began in a flash so brief that even our best mathematics struggles to describe it. Out of that searing beginning came space, time, energy, and the potential for everything we know. But in those early moments, the cosmos was uniform, no stars, no planets, no structure, just hot plasma, expanding, cooling, waiting. If the universe had stayed that way, smooth and even, we would not be here. But nature seems to prefer imperfection. Tiny fluctuations in density, 1 part in 100,000, grew over time into galaxies, into stars, into planets, into us. It was not perfection that birthed meaning. It was imbalance. It was variation. It was the willingness of the cosmos to deviate from uniformity that gave us everything we know. That lesson is written across human history as well. Perfection is sterile. Diversity, tension, even friction, those are the engines of creativity. Civilizations thrive, not when everyone agrees, but when disagreement sharpens ideas without shattering cooperation. The fifth dimension, in this sense, is not about erasing conflict. It's about curving it productively. Like gravity, it bends orbits into stability instead of letting trajectories fly apart. Think of the United States during the Apollo era. The nation was divided by war, by race, by generational conflict. Yet in the midst of that turbulence, the space program pressed forward. It did not erase the divisions, but it offered a unifying horizon. The moon landing did not solve poverty or end violence, but it demonstrated what cooperation and discipline could achieve in the face of chaos. It was not perfection, it was direction. And direction, when shared, is more powerful than agreement. The cosmos itself tells the same story. Galaxies are not smooth disks of uniform matter. They are messy, full of collisions, mergers, disruptions. And yet, out of that turbulence come structure spirals of stars, systems of worlds, even biospheres where consciousness can awaken. Perfection may look attractive, but it produces nothing. Messiness, guided by laws, produces everything. And here we stand today in our own turbulence, social divisions, political rifts, ecological stress, technological disruption. It would be easy to conclude that chaos will win. But remember, galaxies thrive in chaos as long as gravity holds them together. The question is not whether conflict exists. The question is whether we can hold together in spite of it, whether we can build a gravity of shared values strong enough to curve our trajectories toward cooperation. That gravity is the fifth dimension. But let's not sugarcoat it. Gravity can fail. Stars collapse when fusion can no longer balance contraction. Societies collapse when responsibility can no longer balance desire. And unlike stars, we have a choice. We can adjust. We can reform. We can learn. This is where history speaks loudly. Consider the fall of the Bronze Age civilizations around 1200 BCE. A web of prosperous cities from Greece to Egypt to Mesopotamia collapsed almost simultaneously. For centuries, historians puzzled over the cause. Was it invasion, famine, earthquakes? The answer appears to be all of the above. Multiple stresses converged, and the system, too rigid to adapt, crumbled. The networks of trade, the institutions of governance, the balances of power all proved fragile. When resilience failed, collapse followed. Now compare that with the Black Death in 14th century Europe. Tens of millions died, a catastrophe almost beyond imagination. Yet Europe did not vanish. It reorganized. Labor shortages broke feudal systems. Surviving institutions adapted, however clumsily. Knowledge, trade, and culture persisted. Collapse was not inevitable. Adaptation was possible. The difference was resilience. The difference was flexibility. The difference was whether societies could bend without breaking. That is exactly what the fifth dimension asks of us. The ability to bend responsibly, to absorb shocks without disintegrating, to turn crises into crucibles instead of tombstones. And what about today? Climate change, pandemics, inequality, nuclear weapons, all stressors on the system. We face a test of resilience no less daunting than past civilizations. The question is, will we respond with rigidity, clinging to short-term habits until they betray us? Or will we bend, adapt, and curve our path towards survival? The fifth dimension is the deciding factor, because knowledge without responsibility is trivia, and responsibility without knowledge is superstition. Only when the two converge do we get wisdom. Only then do we get resilience. So the next time you hear of rising seas, or new technologies, or shifting geopolitics, remember, this is not just data. This is the telemetry of civilization. These are the readouts on our cockpit display. The question is not whether turbulence exists. The question is whether we are skilled enough pilots to steer through it. And let me tell you, if we can land astronauts on the moon with slide rules and computers weaker than a pocket calculator, we can certainly land civilization safely through the turbulence of the 21st century. But only if we embrace the fifth dimension. The paradox of our time is not that we lack solutions, it is that we hesitate to use them. We know how to generate clean energy. We know how to reduce emissions. We know how to preserve forests, heal soils, feed billions without exhausting the biosphere. We know how to expand education, lower infant mortality, and extend lifespans. These are not mysteries anymore. They are tools within reach. The bottleneck is not knowledge. The bottleneck is will. And that gap between what we know and what we do, that is where the fifth dimension either emerges or collapses. It is not enough to marvel at a telescope's image of a distant galaxy or to celebrate a medical breakthrough in a laboratory. The true measure of a civilization is whether it converts knowledge into responsibility and responsibility into action. Without that conversion, knowledge is little more than a museum exhibit, admired but inert. Space exploration gives us a powerful mirror. When we sent humans to the moon, it wasn't because we had solved every problem on Earth. Far from it. Cities were burning in protest. Wars raged overseas. Poverty and injustice were rampant. And yet, we reached for the moon anyway. To some, it seemed irresponsible, a vanity project of rockets while people starved. But history shows something subtler. The space race was not just an escape from Earth's problems, it was a rehearsal for solving them. It taught us that complex challenges require collaboration, precision, resilience, and vision. It taught us that science is not an ornament of civilization, it is its lifeline. Think of what those missions demanded. Thousands of contractors, hundreds of thousands of workers, millions of calculations, many by hand. Failures analyzed without ego, because ego is a poor substitute for survival. And when Apollo 11 finally touched down on the Sea of Tranquility, the world held its breath. That step was not just onto lunar soil, it was onto a new plateau of what humanity could accomplish. When the fifth dimension was alive, when awareness met responsibility and responsibility was turned into action. But what is most striking is not what the astronauts found on the moon. It was what they saw when they looked back. Earth, suspended in blackness, fragile and finite. That image altered our collective consciousness. Environmental movements surged. Global cooperation found new momentum. The fifth dimension brightened not from the moon itself, but from the perspective it gave us of home. This is the lesson. Exploration is not about escape. It is about return. Every telescope, every rover, every probe that travels outward eventually reflects something inward. We look to Mars, and we are reminded how rare Earth's biosphere is. We study exoplanets, and we are reminded how precarious climate balance can be. We send spacecraft beyond the solar system, and we are reminded how small and temporary we are, and how urgent it is to make meaning of the time we have. Now imagine the generations ahead. They will inherit not only our technologies, but our choices. They will inherit a planet that either thrived because we bent toward responsibility or struggled because we clung to denial. And they will look back at us the way we look back at ancient civilizations, with either gratitude or bewilderment. Gratitude, if we became the ancestors who stabilized the orbit of civilization. Bewilderment, if we squandered knowledge on triviality while the cockpit alarms blared. The fifth dimension is not about transcending our humanity. It is about deepening it. It is about recognizing that every action curves a trajectory, that every choice has cosmic echoes. Just as stars scatter elements into galaxies, we scatter legacies into the future. The only question is, will those legacies enrich or will they deplete? The universe is indifferent to our answer, but history is not. And our descendants will not be. So let us remember, we are finite, and that is what makes us significant. The stars shine because they burn out. Life matters because it ends. Civilizations matter because they can collapse. Meaning emerges not despite finitude, but because of it. The fifth dimension is already around us, waiting to be strengthened by practice, by patience, by responsibility. It is the field that bends awareness into action. It is our only guarantee of resilience. And if we honor it, then one day, whether on Earth, Mars, or beyond humanity, we'll look back at this century and say, this was the moment when we grew into our responsibility. This was the moment when we graduated into cosmic adulthood. The danger of our time is that we mistake speed for progress. Information races across the globe in milliseconds, yet wisdom still moves at the pace of human reflection. We confuse the convenience of connectivity with the depth of understanding. And so we risk becoming a civilization that can transmit knowledge faster than ever while failing to absorb it deeply enough to guide our choices. But here is the cosmic irony. The universe itself teaches us patience. Light from distant galaxies takes billions of years to arrive here. The carbon in your body was forged in stars that lived and died long before the sun was born. Photosynthesis, the very process that lets us breathe, is the product of billions of years of biological trial and error. Nature invests in the long arc. Evolution writes its drafts in epochs, not in tweets. If we wish to endure, we must learn to slow down enough to see beyond the next quarter, the next election, the next news cycle. We must learn to invest in centuries. This is not a new lesson. Ancient cultures already glimpsed it. The Iroquois Confederacy spoke of the seventh generation principle to make decisions today with the seventh generation in mind. The builders of cathedrals in medieval Europe laid foundations for structures they would never live to see completed. Farmers in ancient China tended rice paddies with practices meant to sustain soils not for years, but for dynasties. They all understood what the cosmos itself tells us. We do not own the future, we borrow it. But somewhere along the way, modernity lost patience. We learned to harvest fossil fuels, compressed sunlight stored over hundreds of millions of years, and burn through them in mere centuries. We learned to industrialize food, but often at the cost of soils and rivers that took millennia to form. We learned to extract, to accelerate, to consume at speeds the Earth cannot match. We traded patience for profit, endurance for immediacy. And now the bill arrives not as metaphor, but as rising seas, shifting climates, and ecosystems on the brink. The fifth dimension asks us to recalibrate. It does not forbid ambition, it insists on balance. Just as stars endure by balancing the inward pull of gravity with the outward push of fusion, so must we balance desire with responsibility, innovation with restraint, growth with sustainability. Collapse comes when balance is lost. Endurance comes when balance is restored. And the space race, once again, reminds us of this. The Apollo program was not sustainable, too expensive, too politicized, too driven by rivalry. But from that unsustainable burst came sustainable legacies. Satellite communications, weather monitoring, GPS, material science, and above all, perspective. Apollo itself ended, but its lessons seeded decades of innovation. It was a supernova of human effort, brief, spectacular, transformative. Now we stand at the threshold of a new era of exploration. Private companies launch rockets routinely. Nations plan lunar bases, Martian missions, telescopes that may glimpse the atmospheres of Earth-like worlds. This is extraordinary. But let us remember, the purpose of exploration is not conquest. It is connection. It is not to escape responsibility on Earth, but to deepen it by perspective. Mars is not a lifeboat, it is a mirror. If we cannot manage one biosphere, we will not manage two. That is why the fifth dimension must accompany us wherever we go. If we plant flags on Mars, but carry with us the same short-sightedness that threatens Earth, then the red planet will simply inherit our mistakes. But if we bring with us the humility that comes from seeing Earth whole, fragile, and finite, then Mars may become not just another world, but another chance to live wisely. Because ultimately, the fifth dimension is portable. It is not bound to Earth. It travels wherever human conscience travels. It is the invisible architecture of meaning, the field we create when we accept that awareness brings responsibility, and responsibility demands action. Whether on this pale blue dot or on distant red soil, that truth remains. And so the task before us is clear: to strengthen the fifth dimension here and now, so that when we extend outward, we carry not just our tools, but our wisdom. The cosmos will not wait for us. Stars will continue to die, galaxies will continue to drift, the universe will continue its silent expansion. We cannot control that, but we can control what we scatter into the future. The question then is simple. When the story of humanity is told, will it be the story of a species that reached for infinity and squandered the finite, or the story of a species that recognized its finitude and, in doing so, discovered infinite meaning? So here we are, on a fragile planet suspended in the dark, carrying with us the paradox of our time. Infinite tools, finite wisdom. We can choose to drift like a civilization too distracted to steer, or we can choose to act like astronauts on a spacecraft, mindful of our margins, careful with our resources, committed to one another's survival. The fifth dimension is not hidden in the folds of physics. It is revealed in the folds of conscience. It is the invisible curvature we generate when awareness bends into responsibility, and responsibility bends into action. It is the gravity that can hold civilization together, even when turbulence threatens to pull us apart. The space race taught us this truth. Rivalry lit the rocket, but cooperation sustained the orbit. Fear sent us upward, but perspective brought us home. The most important discovery of the Apollo program was not the lunar surface. It was Earth itself, small, finite, and beautiful, hanging in the void. That was our pale blue dot moment. And it remains the compass we cannot afford to ignore. So let us be the generation that steers wisely. Let us scatter enrichment instead of ashes, legacy instead of regret, resilience instead of collapse. Let us invest our brilliance not only in reaching the stars, but in cherishing the world that made stars meaningful to us in the first place. And if someday another civilization on Earth or elsewhere looks back at us, may they see not only that we existed, but that we chose wisely, that we embraced the fifth dimension, that we lived with the humility of stardust and the responsibility of stewards, that we recognize our finitude, and in doing so discovered the infinite power of meaning. Infinity may end, but our mission does not. Check your instruments, mind your margins, choose your vector, and go scatter something worthy into the future.